Good afternoon. Welcome to the 37th CALLERLAB Convention. Today is Tuesday, March the 30th, 2010. Name of the session is History, Heritage, and Tradition. And my name is Norm Wilcox. I'm moderator. And introducing the panel on my far left is Jerry Helt. Next to him is Ernie Kinney. And next to me is Melton Luttrell. When Gail asked me to moderate this panel, I thought, well, I've been calling since 1962. I should be able to come up with something in the old days. And then I was talking to these gentlemen, and I feel like a new caller. You need to do that in order to call this. It's already called. Okay. So I thought what we might do is to start chronologically. And seeing as how Jerry Helt has been on the longest, starting in 1943, which if my math is correct, that's 67 years ago. I was just barely. I was 7 years old. So, Jerry, would you like to kick it off, please? That's a challenge call, isn't it?
Yeah. Kick it off. Okay, we coming through all right? Okay. My name is Jerry Helt, of which we all know, and it's my pleasure to be here, and we're going to talk about history, heritage, and tradition, of course. And how many here do old-time dancing? How many would like to do old-time dancing? How many really don't give a hoot? Okay. I'd like just to go down the list of areas. A lot of our dancing comes from certain areas, and a lot of our dancing is, the old dancing was called traditional dancing, of which we're discussing a little bit. And if we look at some of the different areas that contributed to our activity today, let's take a quick look at the eastern side of the country, New England, and some of the people who were great callers in those areas and really stimulated the square dance movement. Ralph Sweet. Anybody know about Ralph Sweet? There was a video or a DVD of that in here. Ralph Page. The Brundage family, Al and his brothers and Dad, they were all involved in the old-time barn dance. Floyd Woodhull, does that ring a bell with anybody? Now, I guess he's more from New York than, but he's Eastern. In the New York City area, one of the biggies there at the time, or at one time, was Ed Durlacher. Does anybody know about Ed Durlacher? Oh, Ed, yes. You can't knock Ed. He had a good thing going, and he sold a lot of recordings and went across the country traveling and doing that. So he contributed to it. Let's move on to the Midwest, which would be Ohio, Kentucky, and Michigan. If we go to Michigan, we had a guy named Henry Ford. Anybody know about Henry Ford? I think we all know about Henry. And if we move down to the southern states, we find Texas, of all places. We find people like Herb Gregerson. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Ray Smith. Joe Louis coming up a little bit there. And there's probably a lot of other older ones that Melton will probably tell us about. And moving on to Colorado, we probably would think of Dr. Lloyd Shaw as one of the pioneers, and there are many others in that area, but his name comes up. Let's go to California. Northern California, we had a whole bunch of callers up that way, and a lot of them I don't remember, I don't know. But I'm going to move on to the activity in Northern California. California was, the whole state of California, northern and southern, were very influential of our contemporary form of square dancing. And we find that Northern California, there was folk dancing and square dancing, and it was a combined thing. If you went to a square dance, it would be folk dancing between the tips or between the squares, and which eventually wound up being round dancing between the tips of squares. So folk dancing was a big part of that. Also in Southern California, folk dancing was part of the activity. And if we go to Southern California, there's a bunch of callers. I'm going to just say Bob Osgood, one who is one of our members here, deceased. And there were all sorts. In fact, Lloyd Shaw's brother, Ray Shaw, was involved in square dancing in Southern California. Actually, one of our members who was supposed to be here, Cal Golden, really kind of got his start in Southern California. And there are many, many others down there that influenced our activity. And Bob Osgood was really the guy that kind of got it organized. In fact, he's the guy that wasn't for him, I don't think CALLERLAB would be here. Might be, but he's the guy that really stimulated and pushed CALLERLAB through his magazine. I think how many here are familiar with Sets in Order magazine, which is now defunct or gone. But Osgood was very influential in the calling field, very influential on me personally. A great guy, and I miss him, really. Traditional dancing sort of converted to contemporary square dancing, and a lot of those we can trace back. And I'm going to go to a book here that a lot of you probably know about, or maybe you have a copy of it. If you have a copy, I'd like to buy it if it's real cheap. Henry Ford. Henry Ford was really a person who was interested in the dance activity. He danced himself, and he had the money to produce books and records, and he produced a series of 78 records, of which in those records he had a group of dances called the Lancers. How many here are familiar with the Lancers? Okay, the Lancer is a quadrille, which usually is in 5 parts. And each part has a certain thing in it that we do. And in those Lancers, I think it's the second or third, I'm not sure what part, is a visiting type figure, where the first couple would go out to the couple on the right and honor and bow, and on to the next and honor and bow, and so forth. And that's kind of where our visiting type dancing really got started, from that Lancer idea. And that's not necessarily his book that did it, but long before his book, they were dancing Lancers on the East Coast, and that visiting type figure was picked up in our traditional old style dancing. Now, some of the people who were involved in that were Ralph Page. Did I mention Ralph Page? I think I did, yes. Ralph Page really was a guy who was into the traditional style dancing, and really started it and got it really going on the East Coast. And there's a video over here that you should see that has Ralph Page and a lot of these very traditional things that are going on, and some of the more contemporary things going on the East Coast, contras, quadrilles, and so forth. So you might want to look at those videos. Anyway, moving on to the Lancers. The Lancer had a visiting figure. It had a figure where people would go forward and back and so forth. But the fifth part of the Lancer usually was some memorized, it was a memorized movement. And usually it was, in many cases, it was grand square of all things. And we think of grand square and we think of Lancers. If you think of Lancers, we're thinking of probably a military operation of some kind. And originally the Lancer was a military form to secure a building, a barracks. So if we had a barracks here, I'll tell you what, can we get 4 couples up and let's just do a little demo as to what we're talking about. Don't be smart. I got them up here. We need one more, if we will, please. Buddy, you're a good man. Do you know this young lady? Well, yes, you do. Now, let's say that we had a barracks, a building, and we wanted to secure that building. So, we would do a grand square, of course. We call it a grand square, and it would be dancing probably bigger. It would be more expanded than this is, but let's think of it as a grand square. Now, the thing that you would never do in a military setup is to turn your back on anybody, right? Except the one that you're dancing with or working with. So if you look at the traditional Lancer, it was never back up. You never backed up. So let's start by having side couples back to back. You're on the outside of the building. These folks are on the inside of the building. And let's go. And 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3, stop. At this, the heads are going to go back to back. Sides are going to be facing into the center. Reverse. 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3. Never back to back. Never back up. I kind of said that at the beginning. Never back up. Unless you want. Never back up on your enemy. Hey! Well, maybe it was yesterday, but today might be a whole different ballgame. Okay, we are being taped. Okay, let's have side couples ready. You're going to be back to back. And you're going to go forward, do what you normally do in a grand square. But when you get to the outside, you're going to go back to back around the outside. Ready? And 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3, back to back side position. 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3, reverse. 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3, turn. And 1, 2, 3, turn. And we've secured the building. Bravo. Now, the visiting call or the grand square or whatever it was, here was another movement that they used in the Lancer. Let's have number 1 promenade inside. And when you get home, face out. 2 fall in behind them. 3 fall in and 4 bring up the rear. And from there they do things like sachet right, sachet left, first couple left, first couple right. You can do a million things to get out of it. And that was a very important part of that Lancer. And that movement is used, and I'll put it into contemporary form for you. Bend the line, or face your partner, back away, bend the line, gents left-hand star, ladies right-hand star. Number 4 man first, pick up your partner, arm around, take them with you. Everybody pick up partner. And when you get home, square your set and you're there. And that would be a contemporary movement of that 4th part. Now, while we're on the floor, I'd like to do just a lot of the calls that were called at that time, like Grand Square was something you'd give a name to it and people would execute it. Let's think of some of the others that might have been used. Can we think of some? Well, let's jump up a little bit. Let's think of some of the contemporary. What would be one of the contemporary movements that we do and you say one name and they do it? What? Well, I just want to say some words and they go through the whole routine. Teacup chain, there we go. What else? Spin chain through. Well, not dip and dive. No, you have to give them a little cue on that, don't you? Yeah. You need something that gives 2 words, 3 words, and boom, they do it. Relay the Deucey, of course. Teacup chain. Anything where you do a certain figure by the name. And this goes back to our good old Grand Square and some of those early movements. Now, I'd like to move on to one that this is very old. Is anybody, I'm going to put up a picture here. Anybody know what this is? Okay. There happened to be a yoke and a bow. And that little loop right here is called an ox-bow loop. Ox-bow loop. Okay? Many of our dances, like traditional dances like Chase the Rabbit, Chase the Squirrel, represented a time in our country when people were out hunting. That's a hunting dance, really. If you go to the East Coast, we go dive for the oyster, dig for the clam. What are we doing? We're coastal people getting our food and so forth from the ocean. So all these things, a lot of these early dances were represented by a name of something you would do in your normal daily life. So this would be sort of I would think, Colorado, Western, this thing would probably be used. And we're going to talk about this loop that's on here. The loop was a very important part of that because this was, well, let's go back a little bit further. The horse was kind of cast off in the early pioneer days because it couldn't take the insects and all the other things that were floating around. You couldn't get on the cell and call the vet and say, my horse is here having a spasm. So the oxen was a great, great animal who was resistant to all sorts of diseases and everything. And they were very, very precious to these people. And this ox-bow loop right here was really handmade for that particular oxen. A guy who made ox-bow loops would get that animal and figure out the exact size of it, the way it was positioned, and he would bend this wood by steaming it, I'm sure, and then meticulously making this for the oxen. And nothing worse than having a bad loop and you got a bad thing on your neck. So a hickey, maybe. Can we use that on? I don't think I can say hickey here. Anyway, it would be a good call. Yeah, right. Hickey your partner. I'm going to hickey you if you don't straighten up here. Anyway, the ox-bow loop was a very important part of their culture. So along comes somebody and says, let's do a dance and call it ox-bow loop. So it's my pleasure today to present. How many here have danced the ox-bow loop? Successfully. Okay, let's take a quick look at it. If you have bursitis, you have my sympathy. Would you join hands in the circle? I'd like the number one man with your left hand to get the left-hand lady's two hands without break. No, don't. May the circle be unbroken. There we go. Number 4 is going to face each other. Raise the arch, and here's your ox-bow loop. The number one man's going to go through, back through, hindquarters first, back around, let the lady come through in front of you, all the way through. Well, kind of rippy and snorty. And the last guy goes out. The last lady turns out of it. Oh, my bursitis. Yeah. You never break. The circle's never broken. Let's get the number 2 man to the left with a single ox-bow loop. So you get your left hand. No, just the left hand. No, get that hand out of there. Get your left hand. You're going to make the loop here by facing each other, number 1. Make the arch. 2-man turn, back through, hindquarters first, stand next to the stationary man, let the circle come through. Yeah, hang on. And the last lady turns out of it. Oh, my God. Oh, my bursitis.
It doesn't help to have a real tall corner.
Yeah, that helps. I've been doing this, demonstrating this thing for probably, 40 years or so. And we've only lost, I think, 3 or 4 rugs, hair pieces. You all right? Okay, he's all right. Okay, we're going to have number 3 man to the left with a single ox-bow loop. Back, hindquarters first. And we're going to add another one to it as the next one comes through, make it a double oxbow loop. Back, up through the loop. Oh, I copped a feel on my wife. And pull them through. Okay, here's our double oxbow loop. Give them a hand. Aren't they glorious? God, I hope they use deodorant. I really do. It worries me. Okay. It can be danced with the music. Of course it can be danced with. You got some music? We'll do it with music.
Did anybody got a record with them?
I have a record with the police department. You have music?
Ernie's got music, I think.
Okay, we'll do it with music. Now we need some really old-time, you got some old-time music in there. No rock and roll, please. Good. Okay. We got a hi-hat record here. He owns it, so it's got to be old.
It's called Marker 44.
Okay, are we ready for this? Is the world ready for this? I got to do it in old style calling. Bow to your partner. Bow to your corner. Join hands, circle left. And circle right. And swing your partner. And promenade, because it didn't have a microphone at that time. Need a little more tempo on that dude. There we go. Join hands, circle to the left like you didn't give a hoot. Number one man to the left with a single oxbow loop. Back through. Very good. Circle to the left like you didn't give a hoot. Number two man to the left with a double oxbow loop. Comes one. Comes a second one. Come through. That's it. There you go. That's it. We cheated a little bit on me there, didn't they? Number three man to the left with a triple oxbow loop. Back through. Make your loop. There we go. Now make it a double. You got to get your double. You got to get your triple. Don't let go. Just keep coming. Keep coming. Cheer them on a little bit, folks. Okay, grand finale. Number four man to the left with a single oxbow loop. Then we're going to make it a quadruple oxbow loop. Four of them. The next comes to make it kind of shuffle together. We got to get, there we go. Got to get four of them. There's three. And there's four. How about that? Thank you. You deserve a rest.
I think we're going to have to work on that.
We'll work on that. I have about, I don't want to take too much time here, but no. Going back to the contemporary form of dancing in 1955 or 56, I guess, I met a lady named Madeline Allen. Anybody know Madeline or Dan Allen? They were from Northern California, very much involved in the contemporary square dance form, and she wrote a lot of stuff. And if you look back at some of the old history of the dancing, you'll find her stuff that she put together. A brilliant gal. A lot of the stuff the modern stuff we do today, She was responsible for it, but she never liked to have her name printed. At that time, she was using a piece of paper with little pieces of paper on it. She used it as a board to do square dance calls. And I thought, being an engineer, I thought, gosh, why can't we make something where some kind of a thing out of plastic, of which we had here, and have little do-jiggers on here like this. Let's see, number 2. How many use one of these boards? They're around. They're checkers or boards or pawns or whatever you want to call it. Now, I had a little problem because I like to sit up in bed in the morning and write square dance calls. Well, every time I do that, the things would dump off the side. So I thought, why not fix it so they'll stay on there? So we found some magnets at the time, but we had a problem with the magnets because they were polarized, and we were having guys getting together and doing funny things and ladies getting together, and it was a little on the, funny side. And Kathy said not to even say anything about that. You're going to offend some people in here. But we did have a little problem with that. But all of a sudden, somebody come along with magnetic magnets, and that solved the problem because the magnetic things have no polarizing to any extent. So anyway, we can do it without any problems. Oh, I had a drunk one there. Anyway, that's and at the time I felt I have a lot of friends in square dancing at that time, and I sent out, and I'm going to read off the list here, and I probably will miss some. First, I sent one to Bob Osgood, Les Gocher, Bruce Johnson, Ricky Holden, Joe Lewis, Arnie Cronenberger, Al Brundage, Madeline Allen, and other callers I can't remember. So anyway, that was kind of my gift to these people for being so good in the activity and writing material and doing a great job in promoting square dancing. And that kind of ends my little spiel. Should I ask for questions at this point? Comments or questions?
Anything you'd like to ask Jerry about?
Hey, I got it made, man. A perpetual oxbow loop? Of course. Yeah, you could do it 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4, 16. Yeah, you could do that.
Which will be handy if you smoked. You can tell them to do that and then go out for a cigarette.
Well, yeah. Yes.
Okay.
We need a runner here somewhere. Why don't I?
Jerry, now you must have started with a live band, right? When you started.
Yes, we didn't have recorded music.
Mike Callahan.
Yes.
When did you start with the PA record equipment? What year was that came into play?
Well, I started calling in 43, and there was no recordings to speak of at that time, so it must have been probably 5 years into that when 78 records were around.
Okay.
And that's probably, that would be, 43, 44.
I always wondered when the records started, the record equipment started.
Well, actually, the first one I had was just a plain old PA system that had no controls as far as speed control or anything like that. And it probably had about 2 mic channels, and it played 78 records. Yeah. And very primitive and very bad. Speakers were not too good. Uh-huh. And that was pretty much it. Prior to that, there was no amplification in the old-time calls, and you either had a strong voice, a metronome, or something, or sign language or something to get people through it. So you were screaming and yelling in a hall to get that dance across to them. Speaking of halls for just a moment, some of the older halls in New England, up through that area, if you square up in those halls, you look out, and pretty soon you see a bald spot in the middle of the floor. A lot of those halls were crowned, so people could get up and do polkas and waltzes and minuets and everything would move to the outside. Otherwise, if you have a flat floor and you do some of those polkas, you keep moving in. So they designed those halls so when you did the old-time round dance type dances, you would always work your way to the outside of the floor. Wind it up. Yes. Okay. Any questions? We're not going to get any questions out of this group. Thank you very much. I thank you for your time. And you've got 2-3 guys here that are going to lay it on you. Thank you.
That's a nice hand for Jerry Helt. Yeah, speaking of old equipment, what story I got was that modern Western square dancing started to diverge from the traditional right after the Second World War, because electronics have been developed to the point where you could actually have an amplifier that was light enough that you could actually carry it around. And the story along those lines, there was a caller in Ontario. I was talking to an old chap, and he said that back in the old days, what he would do, he'd go around, and all you needed to do was announce the dance, and the fiddler and the piano player would play the tune that dance was done to in that town. He said he got to one place, and he had a fiddler and a piano player on stage with him, and he announced the dance, and off they go, and he's looking out on the floor, and all of a sudden he stops calling. And the fiddle player said, "Keep going, you're doing great, you're doing great." So he kind of frowned a little bit, kept calling some more, and he stopped again, said, "Keep going, keep going." Anyway, so he went through the entire tip. Come to find out, because there was no PA systems in those days, the head man, number one man in each set, decided what dance they were going to do. And each square in the hall was doing a different dance. So he introduced a whole new concept to them. He had a PA system, so now they can all do the same dance at the same time. So, anyway, who wants to go next? I've got chronologically it is Melton Luttrell. Ernie can go. You want Ernie to go? Okay, Ernie, you got the mic. You go.
Okay, I'll catch you guys later. Back to Bob Osgood. We were discussing one time at the Las Vegas convention. He and Becky were sitting there, and I'd had a question asked me at a caller's clinic that I was holding up in Washington. Where'd we get the word tip? I said, I don't know. So we were sitting at the show in Las Vegas, and I was sitting with Bob and Becky, and I said, "Bob, how did we get the word tip in square dancing?" He said, "Becky, we didn't know." So the only thing I could ever come up with was at the old vaudeville shows when they set the sign out for the next act, that was the next tip. So as far as I know, that's where the word tip came from in square dancing. You know anything else?
Yes. Yeah.
Where did?
Well, the old dance, the person probably called within the set, but the fiddler would collect the money from the people who were dancing, and that money would go to the fiddler as a tip. So if you danced, you collect the money, give it. The number one man would be out collecting the money within your own square, take it up and give it to the fiddler, and he would play usually 2 tunes, and that was called a tip. We still use that thing today.
We need. Yeah. Would they pay us that way, you suppose?
Let me amplify what you said. Hence the saying came, and that's a story I've always heard. The story came later, though. That was the reason for the saying. They used to say after it was over, "Okay, time to tip the fiddler and kiss the caller."
Well, I'd quit quicker.
I also heard that if he didn't get tipped, he didn't play again. If you wanted to dance another tip, you had to pay him in every break. And if you tipped him enough, he'd pay the next dance.
TAW? I don't know. Came out of the dictionary, I guess. I've never looked it up in the dictionary. Anyone ever do that? Look up the word taw? I don't know. Indian? Indian term? Could be that. It might have. Question here.
Where you're from, your name, please.
Fran Waddell from New Jersey. I am asked quite often where Yellow Rock came from. I've heard different versions, and I really don't know how to answer. I'd like to have an answer for them.
Yes. That's Texas for hug your corner. Well, you had to be born in Texas because that's the only place they let you hug your corner.
What I heard.
Mike, please.
What's my name? I'm me. I'm Bob Elling from California. I was doing some research, and from California back during the gold rush days, when a prospector would go out and hit it rich, he would come to the local bars and he'd hold up his golden nugget. And everybody would look at him and say, Yellow Rock, and they'd all give him a hug because he would buy a round of booze for the whole bar. I don't know for sure that's the truth, but it's the most viable story I've ever heard. Oh, Buddy was there. He says it's true.
Well, anyway, back to the subject. The Sets in Order magazine, when I started calling in 1960, was all the square dance programs, which was we call the mainstream program, square dancing. And all the thing was in we went by what was in the Sets in Order magazine. That was our program. That's what we taught. And then along came CALLERLAB. And we started getting our programs here. But we had, I think at the beginning, 25 calls on the program. And that was what we taught. And it seems to me that at that time we had more people dancing than we have right now. Maybe not, but I did. I started at a rural community, 45 miles southwest of Fresno. I was a school teacher, and we got the hall free because 3 of the people that were dancing with us were on the school board, and we had 15 squares to start in my first class. I wasn't teaching square dancing, but I was learning to square dance. I was one of those 15 squares. And our caller came from 40 miles away. First thing you know, we've got a club. And then the clubs start forming all around us. We got lots of square dancers. You couldn't go to a dance with less than 15 or 20 squares. And that was in the 60s. And then I decided I'd try that. When I was in grammar school, my mom forced me to take piano lessons for 5 years. Dad stopped that when he caught me practicing with my baseball glove on. But anyway, you were talking too about what we did. I knew nothing about calling, but I'd stay with this caller that we had and work. And after I learned to dance, I thought, I can do that. But I couldn't. Mind if I sit down? But then back to the programs that we had, I don't remember all the things that were in those programs, and probably, Alaman Left was in the programs. Right and Left Grand was in the programs. Right and Left Through. The basic things that we have now were in those in that little program that we had. And we had only 4 callers in our area, and they were scattered here and there. And my history is not all of square dance history. I don't know what the name of the first amplifier I got was. It wasn't a Hilton. What was the first one? No? Bogan. And my records would play and slow down and play and then pick back up. It's kind of hard to sing with those, you know. And so I finally I sold it to one of the ladies there that wanted to be a caller. I said, oh, let me sell you this one. Made a good friend. And I bought my first Hilton amplifier and been with it ever since, of course. Most of us have, haven't we? And we went to 45 RPM records. And I'm still using 45 RPM records. And I'm doing a dance now once a week at a Manchester shopping center in Fresno for the adult school there. And people come by looking in that big window there and wondering what those damn things are laying on that thing turning. But I produced records for many years after a good friend of mine that I bought the record company from, and this kid sitting over here, his father was recording on the same label I was at the same time. And was that right? What was his name?
For the mic, the answer was Dad.
And I recorded several years for Merle Olds, and then he finally decided he'd sell me the record company, and I bought it. $1,000. I sold it to him for $15,000, but I haven't been paid much yet. So my history of square dance calling in square dancing, it goes back to 1960, and I can't go beyond that because I knew absolutely nothing about it up till then. But I do know about some of the people that were there. Cal Golden, I was president of the Valley Callers Association in Fresno County, San Joaquin Valley Caller Association, for a couple of years. And one of our members was a guy named he was stationed up at Merced at the air base up there, named Cal Golden?
Cal Golden. I think that sounds right.
Cal Golden, yeah, that was his name. But I couldn't figure out how he got the name Cal. Living in Arkansas. Kid from Arkansas. Cal Golden, we had, at that time, 28 callers in our association. Now we're lucky to get 3. And I've become the only caller. Historically, I've become the only caller in Fresno County, and we used to have about 14. And what are we doing? The history of square dancing is fading away. The history, I guess, will always be there, though, won't it? But that's what I'd like to see change, the number of square dancers we get, and what has caused the problem over the years that I got one. Dee Dee Doherty told me about it. She's in Mesa, had been in Mesa every year, and she said we used to have 40 or 50 squares in our groups. Now we got 10 or 12 squares in our groups, and the rest of them are on the computers playing with their mice. And so, are we being outdone by people on computers? Are we not selling our activity? I try, but I don't know. But historically, these guys are a lot older than I am, so they know more about. And does anybody have any questions regarding this? Anybody have any answers?
Rich Real, San Francisco Bay Area. I was wondering if the transition from the sets and order list to the CALLERLAB lists was amicable.
wouldn't dare say that here. I think that's one of our problems. How many calls do we have now that we have? I'm starting from here, from basic program through C3. How many calls do we have? 4? C4 now?
Lots.
Lots.
Now, there are exceptions, okay? And I'm Bob Elling again from California. How y'all doing? Hi, buddy. You got something good there? Okay. Anyway, I think around 1980, 1990, square dancing went through a huge change, okay? Before that time, callers learned how to call to entertain dancers. Starting in 1990, callers taught dancers to entertain them with puzzles. And that's the big shift. That's how I perceive the biggest problem we had. Everything has changed. Lifestyles has changed. You know, there's many, many things that create it. But I still, in my heart, believe. I remember you, Ernie. I went to a dance that was a high-level dance. We spent more money than we could afford to go to dinner and dance with these people, and the caller was calling hard stuff, and nobody shut up. We couldn't hear them. We left that dance, went to your dance, and I went home hiring a kite. I had a ball. I had fun. You entertained people. I'm sorry, everyone here will deny that they're doing it, and everybody here at CALLERLAB will deny that they do it. But they are trying to get the dancers to entertain them. How many of you have ever heard, they got to learn to do this. They got to learn to do it right. I think you used to say, they got to have fun. That's the difference. And I think that's the key. That's what we got to fix before we fix anything else. We got to start trying to entertain people and let them have a good time.
That's a good point. Here.
Okay, I'm Lynn Webster from the Twin Cities. I think one of the things, too, and I'll be honest, I dance up to C4, but I think what he's getting at is we have too many calls they have to memorize. We belong to our Bluegrass Association, and every year we go to the Winter Festival, and every year we have a traditional square dance. The first year there was 4 squares in there. This year we have 9 squares in there. They're having fun. They maybe only square dance 3 times a year at the Bluegrass Festival, but they're having fun. We don't care if they do a swing do-si-do, a back-to-back do-si-do, an arm turn, swing, whatever kind of swing they want to do. We try to get them to do the traditional swing, but we don't care what they do. They're having fun. They go out, they're laughing. The kids, 2, 3-year-old kids are up there doing square dancing, and they're having a good time, and they don't need to take 6 months of lessons to learn how to square dance.
Took me longer than that.
No, just to do the basic, just one level.
Jerry Carmen from New York. Just a comment, perhaps, that at one time the callers were driving the dancers by introducing all these new calls. We had all these experimentals come out. Now I think the dancers are driving the callers because the lists are there, and it's true. It's like a vocabulary. We can choose to use them or not, and the lists aren't to blame. It's the use of the lists. And most of us as callers, if we want to get hired, we have to do what they request. They request a certain level to the club. So we're there to try to please them, but sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
I kind of like to, because we're running a little bit short on time, take this one question from Buddy. And
I want you to start speaking, please. Thank you.
Milton, I'd like you to kind of give us...
Ready? I got one more thing. I invented a call, and you guys should know it. I haven't got a definition for it yet, but it's stack, star, twirl, throw, and a double bias and a quarter more.
We'll take 30 seconds.
Can we talk 30
Have fun with people. Have fun with people. Right.
Okay, it's, again, Bob Elling from California. Is that okay? Or say it again. I'm Bob Elling from California. One thing, and this just happened 2 weeks ago. I did it, or 3 weeks ago. I did a one-night stand. And the group that hired us, they wanted an exhibition. They wanted a square dance club. And I've always dreaded that because everybody watches, and then I hit myself on the head and says, why? Because it's too difficult. So when the exhibition group got there, I says, we're going to do 4 calls. We're going to make a right-hand star, a left-hand star, a do-sa-do, and a promenade in a circle. And that's all we're going to do. And I did it. And I got to tell you, it's the smartest thing I ever did in my life. 37 years of calling. I says, now it's your turn, get up. Every chair emptied. They all ran up. And a lot of those people just joined a class because of that. Think about that. If you got to show people, don't show them anything. Just make it nothing that they can't do by having seen it already. That's just a suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Melton, you're on.
Well, I'm going to begin by saying that, of course, we got off the subject, didn't we? Completely off the subject. And I really wasn't well prepared to talk on the subject anyway. But since we're on the subject, I would like to repeat you something. Joe Lewis, who many of you at least have heard of, was probably my most personal friend in square dancing as a caller, particularly the last 15 years of his life. And he had to be the most intelligent person that I've ever known that was a caller. I presume I've known more intelligent people, and you're completely out of his league, Kenny. Joe was really brilliant. He only came to one CALLERLAB meeting when he received the milestone award. And I begged him time after time to come to CALLERLAB. He said, no, not going. I said, why, Joe? I said, you're a great leader of square dancing. You were inspirational in your day. He said, because they are talking exactly the same kind of talk that we talked when we first started going to caller schools and callers associations. And he said, 30 years from now, you'll still be saying the same thing. And I've been to, 37 now, plus the one that was initially in California. And we are still talking what you're talking and what all of you are saying. I don't think there's any end to the fact that we overdo it. We overpush them. We try too hard to do what we want them to do. And it's not the list. Excuse me there. Heck, it was never been the list. When we formed CALLERLAB and formed the lists were fine. Every time we get new committee heads, they want to do something admirably, and they usually do. But when it ain't broke, why spend all your time fixing it? We had a good list of basics when Bob Osgood had his basic 50 and basic 75. They were good then, they're good now. It doesn't matter to the dancers. They enjoy the stuff that you do. Give them a good program. That's all I'm going to say about that. But Joe was right, because I still come and I still enjoy listening to it, but I'll have to admit it sure is repetitive, because different group of people, same subject, same complaints. Always will be, I presume. So I'm going to go on record to say if it lasts another 30 years and you're lucky enough to be here, you'll be saying something along the same lines. Heritage and history, I'll try to be real brief. My career only began back in 49. So prior to that, the only thing I know is what I picked up or heard or read or something like that from people. So I can't really go much further than that. But I would like to share with you a real quick, interesting story that I thought that happened in those days. Herb Gregerson was the most outstanding name in square dancing, in Western square dancing, they called it at that time. Pappy Shaw was the most influential in square dancing, being from Colorado and being a doctor, and who was very literate and very well known for his books, etc., and his ability to write as well as he spoke. Gregerson was a postman who walked a rural route and learned all of his square dancing from out in the really barn dances that they had in the surrounding ranch houses in New Mexico and West Texas. And Bob and Herb and Dr. Shaw were along in the same time frame, and they were, in my mind, equally influential in what they did, except that Dr. Shaw, to his credit, got most of the credit because of his ability to use the written word. He formed the Cheyenne Mountain Dancers and toured with exhibitions and was very influential, of which our filmmaker, Calvin Campbell, was one of the members of his original Cheyenne Mountain Dancers, along with Herb Egender and some folks that were former member of CALLERLAB. And they did beautiful dancing, and if you haven't seen the film that they put together about 3 years ago, was it not, Cal, that it's beautifully done on the type of exhibition dancing they did back in those days. Herb Gregerson in 1939 was so well recognized that he took a group of his dancers, the Bluebonnet Squares, to New York World's Fair in 1939. And as a result of that, he also toured the country with those dancers. And he had great influence on what happened. Now, it's argumentative, but in my viewpoint, when I've observed over the years, that the dancing that has evolved today probably is more akin to what Herb Gregerson was teaching than what Lloyd Shaw was teaching. And I think Cal would agree to that. Even though the Shaw was the more noted, and I met Dr. Shaw a couple of times, and he was a wonderful man, very enthusiastic. And Herb Gregerson was sort of laid back, and he could not speak the English language properly. His use of grammar was immoral almost. But he had really good ideas about square dancing as it was in that day. And as Jerry was showing you some of the dances that came from the Lancer-type setups, Gregerson at that time was pushing the things that akin to cowboy dancing. And as you use the terms dig for the oyster and dive for the clam, Jerry, which was fishing-type stories, and the other one you mentioned I knew at the time, but I've forgotten. And it brought to mind how the difference in the culture, because Gregerson was from cowboy country, cattle country, ranching country. So the terms we used were rope the yearling and brand the calf and swing your honey with the once and a half. Ducks in the river and going by the ford, and the coffee's in the little rag, the sugar's on the gourd, and the sugar's in the gourd, and the gourd's on the ground. Meet your honey and swing her around. And all of those are Western cowboy-type sayings that they put together for their square dance pattern. And as many of you are up in, not my age, but you're approaching me, remember that the early days of calling, it was very small on the figure, emphasis I'm talking about, and heavy on the pattern that we used. Because we would put on a hoedown, which would go on a longer record, one of the big ones, so we could get more extended time than a 78. And on those, we had a lot of time to put in a lot of patter. An exchange of patter between callers was a priority, and callers guarded it jealously. So I remember very well the first time I went to a caller school that was in June of 1950, and one of the people that was there was Al Brundage, which you may or might not know. It's when I first met Al Brundage. And a fellow from California, I have long since forgotten his name, but I wish I could remember, because he and I agreed to exchange patter. And what it was, we would make sure that we memorize it or type it and keep it, and we would exchange it only if you would give me part of the patter. I'd give you part of the patter. Like I drove a Cadillac to impress my honey that I had finesse. But the finance company took a different view, and now we're strolling 2 by 2. And those are the filler patter songs that we put in rhythm. And instead of prompting, as most of us do now, head square through, swing through, boys run, wheel and tail, you did it in rhythm. Well, a head to couple go forward and back, and a right and left through, and a don't look back. Flutters wheel to go across the ring. Sweep 1/4 and look at that thing, and a right and left through with a full turn to the outside too. And everything was in rhythm. Everything flowed to the phrase in the square dance calls. And the fill-in part was where you'd had a lot of things to do, like on that corner with your left paw and a right to your honey, go G in the hall, and all night long, and to meet your honey and sing a little song. swing that, honey, with a once and a half and a once and a half all around, and swing the next when she comes down. And you would do elbow swings and so forth. And there was a great emphasis on a lot of swinging, a lot of dancing, and very little emphasis on choreography. And I'm not saying it was a better time, because I now contend the very best time in square dancing was probably in the 80s in my lifetime. And that's when plus became sort of popular. And a caller had the range of mainstream and plus for the better dancers, or mainstream for the less frequent dancer. I shouldn't have said better. The more frequently they danced, they could get into plus. And with the plus program come along, then the callers had the ability to call all night long, dance-wise, 2 or 2.5 hours in those days, hour and a half now, 2.5 hours. You could call a 2.5 hour program and not catch yourself repeating yourself and getting into a rut. You had enough variety through the plus program to do that. And if you were a once a month or a twice a month dancer, then the mainstream program was adequate for that. And those 69 basics are good. So in my mind, CALLERLAB did a great service to square dancing. Bob Osgood was the instigator and the primary motivator for it, and we had his blessing all the way through when we put the basics in the order we did, described them and described the styling, etc., etc. I particularly had the styling committee in the early days, and that's when we established where the handholds were, which was a point of great contention between the East Coast and the West Coast in Texas as to whether you were going to use forearm, hands down here, hands up here, or what. But once all that was established and standardized, it still didn't catch on completely, and to this day still has not, as I watched some of the dancers dance a while ago, which was perfectly not CALLERLAB recommended, not being critical, just making the point. Because if you'd have been doing the swing-throughs or the ocean waves, as was advocated by CALLERLAB, there is a way to do it, and there's a way not to do it. But that's beside the point. We still are going to break out and do our own thing, so to speak. And as callers, we are not policemen, so we can't say, no, you can't do that, I'll put you in jail. You can only recommend. And it's been my long-time policy to be very, very strict in class. But once they come to the dance, they're paying me to be a caller, not a teacher. And somebody often asked me, said, why is it you don't fuss at those people doing that swinging do-si-do? I said, because I'm not their teacher. If they come to my class, they won't do it. But if they come to my dance, I'm just being paid to call. I'm not being paid to tell them what to do and not to do. I want them to have fun. So I guess I'll wrap it up real quick by saying CALLERLAB has been a great influence, in my opinion, on square dancing, probably the greatest influence we've ever had for the activity. It, by the same token, has had its bad points, as all of you discussed earlier. We have created so much choreography that the callers have become so complex, and the calls have been so complex that it's begun to take its toll on everybody. I'm not advocating we go back. I'm just telling you what has happened over the years. And if I could take about 3 more minutes, which I see is already over time, or about over time, I'll just quickly tell you that a humorous story about my own career, and I'll get out of here. It's a long story how I got into dancing, but I'll say it's because of my wife, because I would have no part of it. And she tricked me into doing that by double dating before we were married. So anyway, I ended up in my first square dance class, and like most guys that are drugged to their first dance, thoroughly enjoyed it. And I became a caller because at that time we had more dance clubs than we knew what to do with, or dancers, and less dance clubs is what I should have said. And the particular club in this little West Texas town I lived in had a 100 couple limit to their club with a waiting list to get in. I don't know how Sue and I made it, but for some reason they voted us in. And once we were voted in, we were in an alphabetical order, and every other week, we danced twice a month, the 10 couples in order would be the host of the dance. There were no professional callers. All the dances were choreographed and programmed by name: Cowboy Loop, Texas Star, Dip and Dive, and it was up to you to decide the program for that week, which we did. Well, when it come my turn to be on that particular committee for that dance, the guy that was the chairman of the committee, the first name on the list always, came to me and said, Melton, he said, we don't have enough callers to go all around because there was no one caller did it all. There's 10 tips, there was 10 callers. So he said, I can't find enough callers to fill out our program. He said, I think you and I are going to have to learn to call. And, of course, I immediately said, you must be joking. But he gave me a call that was memorized, patterned, and the name of it was Double the Dose, who probably nobody ever heard of or remembers, except maybe Jerry. And so I memorized Double the Dose. And you must know that there was no improvising in the square dance calling that I started. Double the Dose was double the dose for me, and it was double the dose for the dancers. They knew it as well as I did, almost. So all you do is back up and memorize the entire pattern from the beginning to the end, and then you sit down. And so when it was all live music, as Jerry said, I didn't even know what a record was. And incidentally, my first record player was a Masco, if anybody ever heard of it. My second was a Newcomb, and then I went to Hilton. But I got up before the band that night, shaking in my boots, and the band leader to me was the bass fiddle player, Travis Palmer. And Travis walked up to me and said, what key do you want it in? And I know I must have had the most amazed stare on my face of anything. What key? I don't know anything about key or music or anything else. I just know how to sing. I'd sang my whole life, but I didn't know that I was singing, you know. My mother always said the only person she ever saw in her life that woke up in the morning singing was me in bed. But anyway, I said, I don't know, just play something. So they played it, and fortunately for me, as far as my square dance career is concerned, it went okay. And I got a nice round of applause, and had a bunch of people come up and thank me and tell me I ought to really take it up, you know, which encouraged me to do so. But a little later in the night, I thought, man, I better find out what that key was. So I walked back to that Travis Palmer and said, Mr. Palmer, could you tell me what key you played that hoedown for me in? He said, F. So every time I called forever after that, I'd go up and say, play it in F. So I don't know, as a musician, I found out later that's not too smart. But I had a lot of, they can't play many things in F well, I guess, but I played every hoedown in F. So shortly after that, I was hired to call a square dance class, teach a square dance class, after I went to caller school, and I won't get into that story, it's a long story. But after I came back from Herb Gregerson's caller school, I was invited to teach a square dance class in my hometown, where my mother and dad learned to dance, and tried to get me to go, and I wouldn't. So I took my first class, but still there were no clubs around for you to become a caller to make any money. So I've always been a little bit of self-motivator, so I thought, well, I got to do something to make me some money of this. So I'm going to go out to this new drive-in theater they were building, and I'm going to ask them if they'd like to promote a square dance before the movies about one night a week. The guy said, yeah, he'd be glad to do that. I said, what do you need? I said, well, I need a slab to dance on. Well, I'm building a concession stand right now, says he, and I'll build a larger slab, and you can dance on that. Good, that's fine. And he said, now we come to the matter of money. He said, or I did. He said, how much? And, boy, I'm racking my brain trying to think how much. And I said, well, maybe $15. How's that sound? Well, that sounds okay, $15, okay. And I said, now then, we'll need some band members. He said, yeah, you probably will. And I said, well, use 4 normally. That's what I've always worked with at these dances around here. They have a fiddle player, a guitar player, a bass player, and a piano player. He said, that's good. And I said, well, how much do you think I should offer him? He said, I don't know. That's up to you. I said, what do you mean it's up to me? He said, that's out of your $15. True story. Like that one, buddy. So, man, the band size went down in a hurry. I paid 2 of them. I got me a fiddle player and a guitar player, and I split it with them. They got 7.5, and I got 7.5. And to make the matters worse, and I'll really try to be in a hurry here, to come the first night, I went out there, and all I had was no amplifier. I had nothing. I was going to use their sound. And he fixed me a microphone, and you know where he put it? On top of the concession stand. You know how we got up there? With a wooden ladder. We climbed the ladder to the top of the concessions. You think I'm lying, don't you? True story. Went up to the top of it, got the fiddle player and the guitar player. In those days, they all sat down. Had to put a folding chair up for them to sit down, because the old fiddle players never would stand up. They always sat down. And so got up there. The only microphone was tied into the speakers that go to the cars. Well, you can imagine how I sounded, just like I sound now. I see when I record, I always have the music drown me out. People say, well, play my music too loud. It's because I'm drowning out my voice. So I'm up here calling. The dancers are down here. I'm up the edge, afraid I'm going to fall off. Calling to my dancers. And I'm going over the speakers in the card system and the speaker that's on the front of the concession stand that goes out to the dancers. And my fiddle player and my guitar player's up there going away, and people in the car sitting there going crazy because they don't know what's going on, except there's some idiot up there saying do-si-do and things like that. Well, this lasted probably 10 weeks, and about the 8th week, it became increasingly annoying to me to hear all the car horns honking. After it got just unbearable with sitting down on those horns, I finally told the man, I think we better stop this situation. This is not going over too well. It was good days in the old days, and I thank you for your time.
All right. Well, we've had a bit of a glimpse into the past through the eyes of Jerry, Ernie, and Melton. So let's have a nice hand for our Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you somewhere.